Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to my talk on Django logging. Thank you to the conference chair and the conference committee for letting me come and have this opportunity to speak. I am very excited to be here, and I apologize for my voice because for 2 years we've been in a pandemic and I've literally went nowhere. And this is my first trip leaving to go anywhere, and I get a cold on the way. So I'm gonna try to make it through. I've got some drinks. Bear with me as we go through here. Here's a QR code, much like all the other speakers do. There's a GitHub URL, GitHub repo set up at that URL. The reason I have that up there is I want your help. I'm standing up here talking about logging today because I love logging. I'm not an expert in logging. I'm not an expert in Python or Django logging, I don't think, but I am very passionate about it. And so I'm sure there are more people in this room or at this conference or that watch online that can contribute back and help me learn more about logging too. So please visit that URL, open the repo, star it, bookmark it. As I go through the talk, feel free to open an issue. As you go through the rest of the conference, if other talks inspire you, please remember to come back. Like somebody mentioned something about logging. I'm gonna go open an issue in Lee's repo. That would be great. I would like some interactivity through this talk. I'm pretty nervous. I hope my jokes don't fall flat. There's only a couple. But I will ask for a show of hands. I will ask some questions. Even if you think the question's rhetorical, if you feel that you have an answer, shout it out. We're in the small room, which is great, so I should be able to hear you. So shout out those answers. Is everybody good with that? Yeah. Hey, that was pretty good. Let's try one more time. I'll put you on the spot. Is everybody good with that? All right. Thank you so much. You can find me on Twitter. I'm at The Code Writes Me because I don't write the code. The code writes me. On GitHub, I'm just my name, Lee Trout. And I enjoy behind the scenes work. I enjoy infrastructure work. I enjoy operations work. So it's no surprise I like logging. I've been working with Django on and off for the past 14 years. And there's times I'm on a treadmill. I learn something and then I forget it. And then I get bitten by something and I relearn it and I forget it. Usually it is the ORM, but sometimes it's logging and logging configuration. And so the motivation for this talk is that I want to help other people feel like they're not stuck on this learning and forgetting and relearning. At least if you are at the point where you're learning or relearning, here's yet another voice yelling into the wilderness. Logging is cool. Django logging is great. I think if I could do anything, I would just sit at this table and we would just totally nerd out about logging. Hopefully you have some opinions and ideas about logging. So I'm going to take questions at the end, and it'll be in here or in the hallway depending on how the timing of this goes. This talk is not meant to be a tutorial. So it's something a little different. I have some philosophical slides. I have things that I hope tease your brain, make you think about something. Maybe I present something you haven't seen before, and it makes you think, good or bad. Please find me, give me feedback. I'll be around the conference today and tomorrow. I'm in the Slack, so online folks, any questions that come up through the talk, just at me in the Slack channel, the Salon Slack channel, and I'll respond to all those questions when the talk is over. I'll go find a quiet spot and respond to everyone. Folks that are in the room, same thing, grab me on Slack anytime throughout the conference. These slides are about topics that I felt were important that you at least hear about it. I'm going to cover a broad range of topics. This may make you feel like I've left some things out, or you may know something more in depth and you say, well, he's glossed over something important. Please call that out in a GitHub repo. In an issue in the GitHub repo. The majority of the technical bits in the slides are going to be focused on two things: how the logging configuration in Django works, and I'm going to spend most of the end of the talk talking about structured logging, because I think most people can benefit from working on structured logging if you're not already. This is awesome. Like, that keynote was awesome this morning, and there's an XKCD about not making fun of people or laughing at people when they don't know something. There's a good chance, again, I will say this repeatedly through the talk, there's a good chance you know something I don't know, and you know more about something as we go through this talk. Logging, there covers so much territory. So maybe you're bored. That just means you're not one of today's lucky 10,000 people that are hearing about it for the first time. So keep that in mind. You know, that this slide's, that slide that maybe bore you is for the person that it's their first time. But with that said, I do think there's something in here for everybody at all skill levels and working on any kind of project, large or small, on teams, organizations, large and small. And my remote is on the fritz. We'll see if it boots back up. Yes, there we go. So we're going to start with logging in Django. Title of the talk, demystifying Django logging. So logging in Django is just vanilla Python logging. So we've just demystified the first part of Django logging. If you're done already, you can leave. That's it. It's demystified. Django logging is Python logging. The good news is, much like everything else in Django, it's very nice. I'm going to use the word they tell me to say. It's very good. It follows pragmatic Python. I'm trying not to say Pythonic, but it does follow pragmatic Python principles, and that's really good. Because it means if you know Django and you know Python, when you go to get to logging, there's some weird things we're going to talk about, but mostly you'll be able to find your way around. It's just Python. To effectively understand logging in Django means you have to understand Python logging. And to add effective logging, I will say, you're going to have to learn Python logging. So I talked about this sort of philosophical slides, philosophical ideas. This is the part where I say, if somebody wants to yell something out, what is logging? Does anybody have a definition in their head, a word or something? What is logging? Oh, tough crowd. Keeping track of what your app is doing. Oh, that's spot on. Well, I didn't miss it. Something with print. Print with more features. Absolutely, print with more features. So I'm going to share my philosophy on logging, and I'm going to start with this conceptual definition, because it's going to anchor the rest of the talk that we have this concept. I think we're all touched on it. We all know logging as concepts about recording information. Generally, we record this information in a way that we can reference it. We can look back on it. Are there any pilots or scuba divers in here? There's a couple. So pilots, scuba divers, anybody do any activities outside of work and programming where you keep a log, you keep a record? Maybe you cook, do recipes. Yeah, so a few people. Not as many as I expected, though. Okay, so a few people keep logbooks. But yeah, we write down events and things that matter. Pilots write in their logbooks. I took a flight. I took a flight from North Carolina to California, and they're going to write down their flight time and the flight conditions, if I flew in clouds and weather and rain. That's important. We look back on that, and we look at the history of what we've been doing, how we got there. Logging and broadly observability are about recording those things that are happening within our systems, within our programming. An event is like something happened. You have this big batch import process. You start the import process on a cron job, so you may just log off, import process started. That's just logging an event. You may log insights. You may say, okay, as I'm processing this huge batch import, I'm at, item 250 of 500. And then if you're like me and you switch between Go and Python, you still forget that when you go back to Python, you cannot access members in a dictionary with dot notation. So your code gets riddled with attribute error. So, unexpected events get logged as well. This remote is on the fritz. We'll have to ditch the remote. So why do we invest in logging? Why do we log? We know what logging is. We want to capture these things. Why do we invest in it? And who are the logs for? So I'm curious. Who wants to know, why do you log? I heard in production you can't debug. Somebody over here was saying something.
Because we're bad programmers.
Because we're bad programmers. I'm especially, again, the code writes me. Yeah.
Don't know what happened until it has happened in the past.
Oh, did you already read the slides? Okay. So you don't know what happened. Say it again. Let me repeat it the right way.
You don't know what happened until it happens and you look at it later.
Yeah, you don't know what happens until it happens and you look at it later. That's spot on. So at the conceptual level, we're logging for understanding. And we're communicating when we log. Just like pull requests, just like commit messages, you get a lot more value out of those when you put a little more effort into them. The logs are for us. They're for everybody in this room. They're for people that aren't in this room. Logs are at a level, again, this is the philosophical side, logs are about expressing assumptions. You're expressing your assumptions about what this program is doing. If you don't have an assumption of what your program is doing, your logging is not going to be as effective as it could be. Yes, you can blindly log out swaths of data, but it's not going to be as effective as if you have some assumption. You can start to kind of laser focus and say, I want to log this specific thing. So logging is for the person writing the code. It's also for the person reading the code. A lot of people, there's controversy. Oh, don't document your code. Code self-documenting. Comments get out of date. Logging is one way you can kind of walk a middle line there because you're putting in something that's generally human touched. You have your opinion, you're putting your fingerprints on this. And it's not a comment. It is hopefully going to say, up to date with the code. And the third person because I'm in infrastructure and operations. It's for me, thank you, when I'm awake at 2 a.m. and pager duties went off and I'm trying to understand what is going on. I have to start figuring out what the system's doing, how is it behaving. You know, when you write these logs, when I write logs, especially for my own code, and I support my own code in production, then I try to remind myself I'm writing a log for me 6 months from now. So the gentleman in the back, thank you very much for how you identified logging, because I'll say there's a quote from Maya Angelou. I'm going to paraphrase it. Knowing where you've been helps you understand where you're going. And that's a key thing with logging. And if you log your program's behavior and its state, you start to look at what it's doing. In some cases, and maybe this is more metrics and tracing, which we're about to talk about, but in some cases, you'll start to be able to predict where things are going. You'll start seeing a slowdown maybe. You start seeing more log lines showing up. It may tell you there's more load in the system. So like I mentioned, this is broad topic, observability. How many people just subscribe to like observability? I do observability. Not that many people. This is great. Well, this is a great audience for this. So this is a huge, broad topic. Logging is a part of observability. I will argue logging is the oldest form of observability. I think it's the most important form of observability. But if you want a complete understanding of your running, or more importantly, your crashing systems, then you need all three of these things. You need to have the three pillars, as they're called: logs, metrics, and traces. And where we're headed right now as an industry is that a lot of this is moving towards automated tracing. You do sacrifice some CPU and performance to do this, but you are not going to manually go in your code and add traces. You will go into your code and add metrics as needed, and that's called instrumentation broadly. And logging can do that, so you can instrument with your logs. So I'm going to give you a really strong opinion here. Logging will get you most of the way there, and if you're doing nothing else today, the two pieces of advice: start logging and think about your logging. Especially if you're not doing any logging, that's really good because you got a clean slate. Generally, and I'll mention this again later on in the talk, logs are like tests. By the time you realize you need them, it's a bit too late. So when you make that investment in logging, keyword, I'll keep saying that, invest in your logging, then you will come up with better logs. If you think you need metrics and traces, or you're just getting started and you don't want to fool with logging, go get an APM tool. That's Application Performance Monitoring. You can look around for those. Popular ones are Century, Datadog, New Relic. But let's focus our talk back in on logging. So our conceptual definition, I'm going to repeat back out to the room what we talked about. And what I propose to you is that logging is a collection of events for ourselves, both now and in the future, and our teammates, both now and in the future, to understand the state of a running system. Logging is a feature. I don't know, does anybody on your teams or does anybody consider logging a feature? A couple people. How about testing? Do you consider tests a feature? I see a lot of head nods. Observability is a capability. Logging is a feature. Features give your programs, your products, your systems a capability. So observability, my program, my software, my product has the capability of observability because I've invested in features. I've invested in logging and metrics and such. You have to invest in that. So first part of the talk, out of the way, what is logging? Let's dig into the logging setup. We're going to spend a bit of time here. To invest in logging in Django means you have to invest in logging in Python. Python logging might be a bit heavy compared to other things you'll encounter in the standard library. It was shock and awe for me when I first got into this. I'm like, okay, how many moving pieces and which does what? There's a few places in the standard library, where you're going to get into this kind of complexity, and it's like, threading and concurrency. And certainly if you have a different opinion, find me later, because I still think for anything that somebody's immediately going to reach for, logging is the easiest to get started and the most confusing when you try to do anything with it, because it is all this event-driven paradigm. From a simplified view, what's going on in Python is that you have this thing called a logger. You have this object called a logger, and it creates log records. And log records get passed to handlers. So that's the event-driven nature of it. And then handlers use these things called formatters, and they control what the output of your log data does in the final form. So if you're just putting lines in a file, that's a combination tag team of the handler and the formatter that make that happen. But I want to go into more detail because there's 6 primary components. It's not just those 3. That's the overall flow, but I want to talk about each of these components in detail. Every one of these is used in Django logging, and all of them except filters are effectively required for you to implement any logging in your application in Django. So let's go through them in detail. I'm going to start with levels. Django uses Python logging. Python logging is a leveled logger. So leveled loggers means that every log record that you send out is going to have a numeric level associated with it. These help convey priority, urgency, relevance, and they're also instrumental in controlling how records flow through the logging system. They all have a name, and these names relate to constants that you can use when you reference different, let me back up. Let me just stick with this. If you look in the logging package, you can see that there's this mapping of numbers to names. You're going to access these names through constant variables. The same names will go into logger methods, which we're going to talk about in just a second. So if you want to send an info message, there's an info method that'll do that for you. So you're rarely going to interface with the integers themselves, but there's what they are for each level. So as I mentioned, loggers generate records. You call getLogger with an optional name to create a logger instance. If you do not supply a name, you get a special thing called the root logger. As I mentioned, so loggers have methods and they generate log records at a given level. This is primarily how you're going to log in any Python program. You're going to instantiate a logger, you can send an info message or a debug message or an error message, you're going to use those helpers. This talk does not get into the logger.exception method. So there's a logger.exception method that you can use inside an exception, and I didn't get into it because you get into a lot of complexity around tracebacks going out to your handlers, and so you can read more about that, so I'll call that out right now. I don't have that in here. Something to think about when you do log messages, you say logger.info, you should use string interpolation when you do that. PyLint, who uses PyLint? Who does any linting on their code? You have automated linting? Oh yeah, most of the room, that's great. How about formatters? Y'all use formatters? Whole room, oh that's great. So PyLint has a warning, it's warning W 1202, and it just tells you you should use string interpolation. Why this matters is that these make different types of log records. If you consider these two log statements and you're like me, you probably reach for the first one by default. I love the new F strings, I use them everywhere. How many people write logs like the top one? Who puts an F string in there? So the bottom one is better if you're using any third-party services that roll up your logs or group your logs or grab your logs, especially Sentry. Sentry, this matters a lot. The records that they generate, when you look at the two underlying records, there's an MSG attribute, and these hooks for these third-party libraries that touch on this and they can access your raw records. They can group your messages because that context about how many items that are going through with your order, it's just %D, right? So that means every log message looks the same to the underlying technology and tooling that's aggregating your logs. You can always get to the args too if you need them, but you will not need to do that. The other thing that's interesting about loggers are hierarchical. So I mentioned that special root logger. When you call getLogger in Python, Python's maintaining this for you in memory. There's this whole hierarchy and tree. How many people already knew this? No, not quite half. Okay, good. So this hierarchy uses dot notation just like import paths. That's super handy. We'll talk about a more in-depth example. But the important thing to know is that every logger you grab will start as a descendant of the root logger. Loggers have a property called propagate. When you're configuring a logger, you can tell it propagate true or false. If you set propagate to false, that means log messages will not pass up the chain because by default, it's event-driven, things bubble up. So this will prevent log messages, is it propagate false, from passing up through these loggers. Let me go back. I will comment one thing. This also means if you define two loggers as foo.bar and foo, and those have two different handlers attached to them, you will get duplicate log messages. So that's important too. Another weird thing that some people don't realize, loggers inherit their level, their default level when you grab a logger. That we talk about those levels, like is this an info level? You send the log record at a certain level, but your loggers are filtering those messages at a certain level. Loggers inherit the default level from their parent. By default, that will be the root logger. The root logger's default level is warning. So when you start logging and you see no logs, that's the first thing to check. Who's my root logger? What's my logger level? What's my handler? What's my handler's level? We're going to get into all that. If you set the root logger level, all descendants of the root logger level will inherit that level. So that's really important to understand. Log records themselves contain all the information about your logging event. You generally do not instantiate these yourself. You can, there's a make log record helper, but generally you're going to call the logger.info, logger.error, and under the hood, it's generating that log record object for you. Here's a representational string. I do a bunch of stuff in the IDE or the REPL. I'm going to tell you right now, if y'all don't do that, you're missing an opportunity. That's my favorite way to play with all this stuff. If I'm wondering, how does this work, or I forget how something works, I open the REPL, and I just start making objects, and I play with them. So all these examples have just kind of the string repr of what is this thing. And so this is what a log record looks like. And what that's telling you is that I have a log record. It's generated on the foo logging channel, so I called get logger foo. That'll get that. That 20 means it's level 20, means it's info. You also get information about where this logging call happened, which is super handy. So this tells us that it's happened on line 22 in logingbasic.py, and the message was hello. So log records have over 15 attributes that you can use to format log messages. You can use the keyword argument extra, and you can supply your own extra data, and that'll get put on the log record as an attribute. We'll talk about that a lot in structured logging, which is coming up. Handlers are used for setting levels, filtering, and formatting. Here's the default stream handler. So you just go grab a stream handler. It'll start any of the messages it gets. We'll dump them out to standard error. There are multiple handlers built into the standard library, and they'll help you output logs in various places. So you can use handlers to output logs to the console, to files, to queues, to emails, to syslog, to HTTP, and I think there's like 4 more. The important thing you should know is by default, handlers run in the main thread. They're running in the same thread that your program is running in, unless work has been done to explicitly avoid that. So be careful with that. You don't want to add delay in your request response cycle with Django applications. You don't want logging from your view to cause some 2 or 3 second delay. This is really important if handlers are shipping logs across the internet. But most third-party integrations that you would deal with, they handle that for you, and you generally don't have to worry about it. Filters let you inspect and even mutate log records. The filter method on the filter instance is generally how you do this, but you can also just pass in a function. You can subclass filter, you don't have to. Any object with a filter method will work since I think Python 3.2. Filters can be added to both loggers and handlers. So if you remember my little simple diagram at the beginning, I had loggers and I said can filter, and I have handlers and it says can filter. So what happens when people add logging and they start configuring logging, they'll lose messages later because they added a filter and they forget the interplay of how all of these things work. So something to be aware of is that if you add a filter to a logger, not a handler, add a filter to a logger, its descendants will not inherit that filter. So if you start configuring other loggers in descendant namespaces, you will not have that filter. It's another point of confusion. I run into that all the time. The last piece we'll talk about is formatters. Like I said, formatters work in concert with handlers to give you that final output to get your log records out in the format that they need. That's generally a string, but that's not always the case. A brief snippet from Django's server formatter here. This is where the record is mutated to ensure that there's a server time attribute that can be used in the formatted string output. We're going to go through Django's logging in a second, and you'll see that. But the most important thing, this is my favorite slide in the whole deck. Loggers, handlers, filters, formatters, and levels, by your powers combined, you get Python logging. Thank you very much. All this complexity is actually really great, though. And I do think it's complex. Other people may say, it's not that complex. I think it's very complex, but it's great. And it's by design, and it gives us a really good benefit. We get this separation of concern that code generating logs does not have to care at all about where it's going. And code that cares a lot about where logs go does not have to care about how it gets its log messages. This is really important. You think kind of like this worst case scenario that can happen is that you grab some library off the internet and put it in your application and start using it. You don't know, but that library author doesn't know all this, and they actually configure log handling inside their library. It's a bad idea. If you're making a library to ship around, you just want to send log messages. Let the consumer deal with where they go. You start running this on your web server, maybe they're logging to a file handler and they don't use a rotating file handler, and so they start filling up your disk space with junk logs. Ask me how I know this can happen. Now, it's been a decade ago, but this is important. So it's a great separation of concerns, and it's a good design. So configuring logging, and I'm a little bit behind time, so I'm going to speed up. When configuring logging, all this logging has to be configured, and I think the important part of demystifying Django logging is understanding how Django configures its logging and how you would interface with that configuration. As with everything, the Django docs are fantastic. Logging is no exception. There's 3 main sections of Django logging. They're in that GitHub repo. You can find information on the overview of logging in Django, the how-to guide for configuring and using logging, and there is a logging API reference which talks about what kinds of log records you can operate on and understand the kind of logging namespace of what's inside Django. I'll offer you some advice that I take myself and I recommend to everybody else when you take your first steps with this. Copy the default logging configuration out of the Django source code. It's in Django utils logs, default logging config. Copy that and put that in your settings in the logging key. And people say, Lee, the docs explain how to extend the configuration. They don't say copy the configuration. I personally find it easier to manage all of my logging configuration in one place. And I want Django to do my full logging setup, and I prefer to see everything there. I'm also really lazy, and Django has great defaults, and it already has a console handler, and I reuse that on like all my stuff. So grabbing that default logging setup is super handy. And there's examples in the docs of all this. So as we move through here, I'm going to do a deeper dive really quick on this default configuration so you understand what's going on in it. It's a giant dictionary. In this dictionary, it's the dict config format, and this is built into Python. So this is just standard Python configuration helper. What's really great about this is it lets you configure all of your logging in one place at one time. You don't have to, but that's what it can do, and that's how I recommend most people use it, especially when you're just getting started. It's extremely powerful because it's just loading it in your settings file. You can actually pass your logging configuration around as JSON. So you can load JSON out of an environment variable if needed. You can load it from a file on disk if needed. So you can dynamically load your logging configuration and pass that around. It's, in my opinion, much cleaner to do that than litter your logging configuration if you needed to load something out of an environment variable. So the flexibility in the config comes at a small cost of this unusual syntax and unusual resolver as it parses these dictionaries. It has some rules. You always have to go and kind of refer to the documentation to remember that. This is an example straight out of Python docs. You put this block inside your formatters section, and this special key with the parentheses, that's saying go load this class. Works a lot like Django settings. When it sees a dotted path, it will go and load this class, instantiate it, and then those extra dictionary elements, those extra items, are actually passed as keyword arguments into your constructor for that formatter. So Django's logging config is copied into our settings file. Let's understand what it's doing. When you start running Django in production, the most important logging behavior is that logs at the error level and above are emailed to the admins, assuming you have admins configured and you have a way to get the email off the server. The exceptions are logged at the error level, so exceptions will come out as well. When you're running Django locally or in debug mode, info level and above are reported to your console, and that's anything inside Django. This includes access logs for local development server, which I'm sure you've seen when you do run server. And we can see all this in the default configuration when we walk through that. So if you copied that over and you put it in your settings file, this is what you're going to see. The only thing Django changes from the default is that it does set disable existing loggers to false. And that's important because that will keep the Django configuration from potentially stomping on any other previously configured logging. So the first piece, and you'll see in this dictionary, are formatters. Django uses a custom formatter for the development server access logs. We talked about that. We looked at that code example. So you can see they reference server time in the format. So we can do that because that custom server formatter ensures that server time is available. This is what those formatted records look like. You run server. Filters is the next piece. Django has 2 filters, require debug true, require debug false. You can use those filters on loggers and handlers. Django uses them on their handlers, and it just prevents things like mail admins from sending email if you're not in production. So if debug is false, it will actually send emails. When you get into the handlers, that's where you'll see these referenced. Django currently has 3 handlers, console, Django.server, and mail admins. Each of these handlers is responsible for controlling the flow of the log records out of the system, and that works in both production and development. This is where you start to tie together levels, filters, and formatters. The most important part we get to is logging. Django uses 2 logger definitions to control the flow of log records across different channels or namespaces. The logger covering all of Django namespaces uses both the console and the mail admins handlers, and it can do that because of the filtering. Django server uses only the Django server handler. It'll send anything at or above the info level, but importantly, it sets propagate to false. So that's only going to go to that one and not go out. This is something important about loggers. The keys and the other mappings are just IDs that let you reference that object definition. The keys in the logger dictionary are actually the logger names that are going to be instantiated. This is very important. The key is going to be the logger. So when we see loggers Django, this is the equivalent code, logging.getLogger Django. Adding a logging configuration at the debug level for Django DB backends will let you see that SQL generated by the ORM. This is super handy if you don't have debug information available. At some point, you may find yourself seeing too many logs or no logs at all. There's a good bit of complexity at play as your configuration grows. It's easy to get overwhelmed if you're new to configuring logging, or if you're like me and you set it up a year ago and you forgot and you come back to it and you start working on it again. But I know you can't read this, it's kind of small. Just know that there is a really nice flowchart in the Python docs, and that'll help you debug like what's going on with your logs. It explains how the logging flow works. And if nothing else, drop a print statement in your code. See if your code's actually being reached. I actually prefer raise an exception because I use the run server plus, so I throw an exception, and in my browser I get that really nice interactive console. You can always drop in a breakpoint. Python 3.6 or older, you will need to do the import PDB and set trace dance. And the last thing I'll do when I'm debugging logs, if something's not working the way I expect, I'll start doing incremental log changes. So I'll go into my logger and I'll put a very specific logger definition in there. And so I may say, Django backends DB, or Django DB backends, and get more specific in Postgres and see if I can find a backend namespace. But contextualizing these examples around some software to run a pizza restaurant, when you set up a Django app, either way I set mine up, I have a project. Here's an example project called Pizza Pro. I've got an app called Core. It's got some views. When I go add logging to my views, I import logging, I instantiate a logger, and I use the special double underscore name. How many people have seen this pattern? Okay, great. So that's all the room, basically. That's wonderful. So we do that because we're getting our module name. So it's great that we all already know that. It's really great to do that because that means when you go to configure your logger definition, you can start at the highest level, the most broad scope. You can grab any logs out of your Django project. Here we're instantiating a logger at the Pizza Pro level, and we're configuring that, so there'll be project level logging. Reminder, if you do something like this, you will get duplicate logs. So you can't have Pizza Pro and Pizza Pro.apps without putting propagate false on Pizza Pro apps. So I see all of a sudden things duplicate, that's why. So just a quick recap, when you create a logger, it's great to use the module's name attribute. Be aware this will cause problems if your module is an entry point. You'll run into this with Heroku and other platforms where you need to run a cron job and your entry point, your script runs as an entry point. Now name is main and doesn't help with your logs. So in that case, just namespace it for your project. So the last thing I wanted to talk about, and I know I'm going fast and I warned you, it's like I'm covering a broad thing, is you have this underlying configuration, Python configuration, the Django configuration, and how the interplay works. And you're actually going to start writing logs. I think structured logging is a great way to start writing those logs. How many here already do structured logging? So it's about a quarter of the room would be my guess. How many people that are doing structured logging, do you use a third-party library? Do you use structlog? Something like that? Yeah. So half of that half about use structlog. With regular logging, you just toss out a log message. This is a great place to start. I got a pizza order for 2 large pizzas with cheese and pepperoni, and there'd probably be some interpolation operators in there, but you just log this message, this thing happened. With structured logging, we take a different approach. You start structuring your log messages and the contextual data that you send to support the log message. So now we send an order received and items, and the kind of the item was a pizza. Structured logs let you express concise events with explicit context to generate log records. These log records generally are easier to transform when they're sending and received, faster to parse when they're received. I think every major logging and analysis platform is going to work fine with structured logs. Watch out for sensitive data, too many unique attributes or large payloads. If you start sending all kinds of unique attributes and you're using elk stack and Kibana, there's like 1,000 attribute limit. I forget how it plays with Kibana, but you will blow out your cardinality if you send all kinds of stuff in there, and you'll have to go tweak it or talk to your elk stack admin. So be aware of that. One minor caveat, when you use the extra keywords, so you're like, you walk out of this talk and like Lee said, use structured logging, this is going to be great. So now order.received, and I'll put some data in there. You go in there and you go and make a log record, and I'll show you what's on this log record. You get this default set of attributes. you have to create something like this extra formatter if you're going to see those attributes. So you start seeing all that logging out, you're not going to see anything but those logging events, and you've sent all this extra data. So this extra formatter can pull those attributes off the log record. It's kind of the one thing. All that extra information just becomes attributes on the log record. So what happens is before, you see things like order.received, but you don't see the information, the context around that. You put that in play, or a handler like that, and then you'll see after order received, and the way I make my little handlers is just to dump that information out. Now you see order received, and the context goes with that. So I'll give you some advice on structured logging and some experiments I've been doing in previous teams, and some things to think about. You kind of look holistically at the behaviors of your entire tech stack and what you can do with logging. Define your events up front, and this is really important with like working with a team. Create a rule for how you'll format these messages. For example, you might choose subject.behavior or noun.verb, so we order.received. You can be consistent about these kinds of events too. You can classify common actions or behaviors. Remember I was talking about you do this big import process, so you can have like a state on the end of this or a suffix. Depending on your logging system, it may be easier to do a prefix, a state or prefix on the front. But if I was doing this suffix and I'm processing 100 orders and I want to know progress and I'm logging out progress, I'm going to send something like orders.items.progress. And I'm going to talk to my team and I'm going to say, hey, everybody, everything that ends in .progress is going to have this schema payload with it. It's always going to have a total count and a current count. And I may have things where I can order progress, and so there's an example that looks like extra just gets an order ID. Obviously, more context is very helpful. You could even say that as explicitly order ID and not just ID. So these are things to keep in mind as you put your logging records together. Duration is something that you might want to do. Keep in mind that may work better in a tracing library. On my team, I would document duration events, something like this. Please, for all of your operations people, when you log things with numbers, if it has a unit, please put the unit on the key. Please and thank you. There is nothing worse than looking at a log record and it says duration 2. Okay? 2 milliseconds, 2 microseconds, 2 seconds, 2 days, 2 hours. I don't know. But 2 milliseconds, please and thank you. And this is an example of what this was like with iOS format or ISO formatting. And I don't know, you could argue, things you say, Lee, well, maybe start time should have UTC on the end of it too. So just things to think about to make your life a little easier. You can start to exploit a consistency to your logging, and it's super helpful. Another interesting pattern, I don't know if anybody does this, the people that use StructLog probably do this, is that you can let your loggers own the context. I'm like, well, what does that mean? It means you can bind data to loggers with a facade class. So you can have this facade that wraps over a logger and just passes through anything that looks like a logger method. So you can bind data on your logger. And you start to get into more kind of like functional programming, and you do some dependency injection or inversion of control. It may not be dependency injection, but you can have something where I have this bound logger. It's an example of like a thing I made up. I have this binding logger. But it lets me take a logger and capture it and then bind some piece of contextual data to it. So now I have a bound logger that will always log a job ID. And then this bound logger, when I call .info on it, I can say job.started, and I know job ID is already in there. And this is in StructLog. If you use a StructLog library, they have a concept of this in wrapping loggers. But then what you can do is you can pass logger methods around. So you can write logging helpers that help you maintain this consistency in your logging by just passing in a logger function. And so if I want to log the duration, I just pass into that bound logger info and the name of the event that I'm logging, the x.duration. And then managing this on the other side is super easy. Since it's already bound, I only have to care about inside these helpers the extra information being the relevant context. So a duration helper, I only have to care about putting my duration milliseconds, my start and end time in there. So I talked about logging being a feature. How many people test their logs? 2, 3, 4, maybe, yeah. Super important. If you make this investment in your logs, test your logs. You can do this with facilities that are in the standard library on unit test. Test case has a cert logs context manager that you can use. There's also a great third-party library called Test Fixtures, and they have a great log capture context manager here. And that's fantastic for being able to see that it will pull all the attributes off your log records and makes it super easy to test them. How many people are doing type hints in your Python code? About half there, maybe more than half. Fantastic. That's awesome. How many people type your logs? Maybe like one person. I was like, me and the other person. That's great. So you can type your logs. You can use a typed dictionary. You could use a data class. The problem is, and we're almost out of time, and so we may have to do questions outside. The important thing is you have to write helper functions if you want MyPy and friends to help you with your logging, because the type checking will have to happen on the receiver. And so you have to write receivers. Now my team, we experimented with this, and it was actually pretty good because we used Copilot or we used Tab 9. If you write everything in a predictable pattern, it will just generate all of your things for you. So you go to add a new, the way I have log progress, you go to add a new log foo, it'll automatically fill in log foo, foo log context. So everything was very predictable. When you go to use your logs, and I'm gonna have to speed up to go fast, you're gonna run into stuff where exceptions show up in Sentry. And I just want to touch on what you'll see when you use common software. There's exception in Sentry. When I go look in Sentry at my exception, my logs are captured as breadcrumbs. Structured logging data will be pulled off of that by default. So this just happens out of the box with Sentry, and that's great. If you're using something in the elk stack or logs.io or Honeycomb, what you'll see when your logs get passed over is generally those attributes will all show up as part of the log record. And it's really nice because you're not having to do any data extraction on the receiving side. So you've already named. I can look at this and say, oh yeah, what was passed into this? And the message was an order progress. Everybody in the room, what do we know about progress events in Lee's code? They all have a current count and a total count. So immediately I can just go ahead. I don't even have to like look at what's on the records. I can just go ahead and type in current count, total count. So this is a great way to exploit consistency in your logging. And I think structured logging helps you do that. So again, I know I went super fast. The whole point of this was like, I said a bunch of stuff. My slides are in that GitHub repo. You can come in here, check out the slides, open an issue, open a pull request, but I've given you something to like kind of tickle your brain, give you something to think about to go and research later. Remember, the best logs are the logs that you have. So thank you very much.
Hi, thank you. Great talk. When you're sending out structured logs, you need something on the other end to like collate and visualize them and make that interactive. I've used paid services that do this really well, like Loggly, but are there any good open source alternatives?
Signos is the new one, I think, and I think they're all open source, self-hosted. And I think they're moving to use ClickHouse for the underlying data store. Other than that, I mean, it would be like running the elk stack locally. But I don't know of any like lightweight local options that do that. Good question, thank you. I guess I should repeat that for folks online. His question was like, how do you analyze your logs and look at your logs without using a paid service? And reminder for folks online that are watching, questions in Slack, tag my name, I'll go answer them after the talk.
Thank you. So I'm really new to this, obviously. So how do you like, what do you call it, log rotate?
Okay, yeah. So I went super fast. I didn't get into tactical, like using logging. There is a talk from 3 years ago. Ryan J. Sullivan gave a talk at DjangoCon. Oh, you're sitting over there, actually. Yeah, I see. He gave a talk in 2019, and he gets into all the tactical stuff. He doesn't get into the philosophy. He gets all of this tactical stuff. But I don't remember, did you do rotating? You did file handler, but did you rotating file handler? I don't remember. It's on YouTube. Check that out. But yeah, use a rotating file handler. So that sort of behavior is built into handlers.
Maybe one more? If anyone has one?
So speaking of sizes, what if you by mistake you log too much? How do you protect against that? Maybe through your tests or whatever.
Give me a better example. I'm not sure how to answer that. Like,
let's say you just like the progress thing. Like you decided to log progress of some jobs that are happening, and suddenly your granularity is such that you have like 1 million things per job, and you didn't expect that, but in production it's all blowing up. How do you protect against that?
The easiest thing to do there is if you set up your levels and your logging effectively, then you change a level somewhere, like as a Band-Aid fix, raise your, assuming all that's sent at info, raise your logging config in production. Hopefully you have a way to do that easily. Raise your logging config in production up to error level or higher level immediately. So that's the Band-Aid fix. And then the longer fix is then to go in and add more specific logging. And there's more specific handlers. And there's some libraries out there that will help you do sampling. And so you can sample your logs in a handler. So everything shows up to the handler, and the handler then samples and only forwards a sample of things. Thank you. Those were great questions.
All right, Lee, thanks again. Once again, everyone, please help me give him a round of applause.
Thank you.